Welcome to my interview series. My artist name is The Golden Repair, and one of the things I do as The Golden Repair is interview people who inspire me, authors, therapists, coaches, musicians, artists. And today I am with my dear friend Shayla. Hello, Shayla.
Hi, Eric.
Shayla and I met 15, 16 years ago in Nelson, and we have recently reconnected, and I'm delighted that you're here to talk about what you do and what you've done in your life. I'm just going to read a little bit of who you are, what you do, just to get us started here.
Sure.
So you are a coach and a mentor who works with psycho-spiritual approach, which has evolved over a lifetime of dedicated practice, training, exploration, and in-depth work with clients and students. One of the foundations of your work is a perspective on the human psyche called the multiplicity of identity, which means that who you are is not one thing. Who you are is not one thing, but you have many dimensions to your being. Rather, you have many dimensions to your being, many parts, and all of them interacting within a living, dynamic, intelligent system. Instead of being one solid fixed thing, you are a complex river of consciousness with many different pools, currents, whirlpools, and eddies. Shayla's approach is rooted in the co-creation of an alchemical container for transformation, healing, and evolution. She is dedicated to lighting the flame of our full aliveness, to embodying the divine adulthood that allows us to become fully human, to meet this moment with all of who we are. She weaves together threads from different approaches and traditions, including meditation, grounding and embodiment, creative inquiry, emergent dialogue, and indigenous and shamanic practices, including ritual, dream work, and intergenerational healing. I am so excited to explore all of that with you.
Yeah, sounds great on paper.
And first, as I love to do with all my interviews, I'd love to hear just a little bit of what was your life like growing up as a child? Where did you grow up, and give us a sense of what life was like for you?
Sure. My father was, for quite a long time, he was an ambassador. He was Canadian. My mother was American. And so I lived all over the world.
Okay.
If he would be going on a longer posting that didn't feel like it would be good for us two kids, me and my brother, they would leave us with my grandparents in Connecticut, just outside New York City. Mm-hmm. So we spent a lot of time in this beautiful, beautiful place that my grandparents had. It was like heaven being there.
Wow.
And I often think I wouldn't have survived my childhood without my grandparents.
At some point you ended up in India, is that right?
Yeah, I was in India for about 25 years altogether.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked with Mother Teresa, and then I ended up in a community in the Himalayas where I taught and studied for 23 years.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something you can say about what was it like to work with Mother Teresa?
I can say that, which has been my experience with a lot of different people in my life. Mother Teresa was an amazing woman, mm-hmm. and she wasn't what she appeared to be. Mm-hmm. Like that image that everyone has about Mother Teresa is very, very skin deep.
Yeah.
And my uncle also he did a lot of work with her. He had a huge charity and they worked together. And we both had the same experience that Mother Teresa was very powerful and very ruthless when it came to getting what she wanted. Right. She would do anything for her people, mm-hmm. And a very skilled, very, very skilled with people. Like she knew how to pull the strings that needed to be pulled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard once she was quite savvy politically, or just
Yeah, she was street smart.
street smart.
She wasn't like a pure white saint floating above the streets of Calcutta.
Yeah. Wow.
Which actually I think is great.
Yeah.
I think that's good. It's just so interesting how the archetype turned out to be something very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from there, say again, you went to teach where?
From India?
No, from working with Mother Teresa, you went.
Oh, then I went up to a community in an international community in the Himalayas, where I studied and taught. I studied all sorts of different spiritual disciplines there.
Do I remember right that you have a PhD in meditation? Is that?
I have a PhD in non-dual philosophy.
Non-dual philosophy. Okay.
Yes. It's so interesting. I think often, especially these days, the way we're evolving and the way we're being asked to evolve and develop, we have more than one lifetime within this time on Earth.
Right.
So that very much feels to me like another lifetime.
Yeah.
And if I had to do a PhD again, I would not choose non-dual philosophy. I can tell you that.
What is that what you were teaching as well then, or?
I was actually teaching a whole process that I still am very passionate about, called Emergent dialogue and creative inquiry.
Okay.
Yeah, so we did a lot of inquiry. And then I also, for many years, I was a coach all over the world with people in something I called creative, I forget what I called it. It was learning to speak in public completely authentically without any script or any, just to speak from the heart and from the body into without an agenda. Yeah. I loved doing that.
And just a little bit more about India. Do you miss being there? Like, that's a long time. What do you, if you miss anything, what do you miss about it? Or?
I definitely have, there's parts of the life that I miss. I miss the mountains a lot because they're so incredible.
Yeah.
The Himalayas are like a living being.
Yeah.
It has its own energy and its own wisdom.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful place to live. And so I often, as a screensaver, I have pictures that take me back to the feeling of being in those mountains. And I miss certain aspects of the culture because it's such an extraordinarily different culture than ours. Mm-hmm. It's quite broken, just as ours is. In fact, it's profoundly broken. But when I first came back, after 23 years, when I came back to the West, the two things that shocked me the most were, first of all, how separate everyone is here. Mm-hmm. Because it's not like that in India. The web of interconnection is thick. Mm-hmm. And you can feel it even in your body. Like people, you can't really survive there unless you're part of a community,
right?
And so that was a bit shocking, the isolation that is here. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that shocked me was how serious our culture is. Mm-hmm. Because people in India sing and laugh and dance all the time. And, every third or fourth day is some kind of festival that they're celebrating. And I was like shocked by the lack of that in our culture. Mm. It's just work, basically.
Yeah.
And now it's work and technology and
Do you go back to India at all, or?
No, I haven't been. I've been other places. I feel like I've got so much of it inside me that I don't really feel called to return.
Yeah. And was it Nelson that you came to pretty quickly after coming from India?
Actually, I went to a place called Duncan on Vancouver Island because my mom was dying.
Okay.
And so I was there for a few years before I came to where you were in Nelson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was just a few years between India and getting to Nelson. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was that like, starting up your life in Nelson?
I think I was so lucky to land in Nelson. I mean,
Yeah,
we both know it well,
yeah.
but it's a community. I think it's a community. Oh, how to say it? It gives, on a certain level, it gives each person who's there quite a bit of freedom
Mm,
to follow what's calling them.
mm-hmm.
And I remember, we had dressed very differently in India. And when I came back to the West, I was trying to figure out how to dress. And my daughter, who had come before me, she said, "You can walk down the main street in Nelson in your pajamas and no one will care." And it is a lot like that there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
So
there is a lot of community there too. So that
yeah,
was very, very beautiful for me to feel that there is a real community there.
yeah, and some beautiful mountains and nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you were my first, what I would say is my first spiritual teacher, really. Before I met you, yoga had been my practice, and mostly as a, I would say mostly as a physical self-care. But I started taking your gift of presence
Yeah.
courses. And, the one thing that really stood out to me was just how down to earth and human, you just felt like one of the group doing it together. You were certainly teaching. It was clear you had experience and all of that, but I just felt an easy connection with you right away. And
That's very, very important to me. And I think I've gone even further in that direction. For some reason that really, really matters a lot to me.
mm-hmm.
And lately I've been exploring a passion of mine, which is leaderless groups.
Mm,
And I know that I've explored that on and off throughout my life. And I know that's not an easy thing to have a very powerful, coherent, alive leaderless group. It actually requires a certain level of maturity
mm-hmm.
to create that kind of coherence without a leader.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's many places where leaders or facilitators or teachers or coaches are essential.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think, anytime there's someone who is fulfilling that role, it's so easy to give away a part of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What I remember, I loved that group, and it was an incredible experience for me too.
Mm-hmm.
And what I remember about you is one practice we did together one evening, and this has stayed with me ever since it happened. You contacted such a deep longing in yourself for true intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
for healthy intimacy, and you expressed that longing so fearlessly
Mm-hmm.
without any inhibition at all. And I could feel like, oh, that's something in his, what I would call your soul code,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's going to take him on a path, and it has.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I feel like a lot of the work you did around attachment work and
Mm-hmm.
has been very connected with that. Does that
Yeah.
feel true to you?
Yeah, and I remember that too. I remember that exact process. And what I remember is I was being jokey. You know, I think the specific question was, "What do I want?" And
Yes.
I was,
Yes.
I remember joking. I want easy answers was one of my,
Wow.
and I was kind of hovering around the surface with some jokey kind of answers, and then it got to something like I want love, or I want to be loved, or I want, deep
Yeah.
love, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly how I got there, but I know I felt very safe,
Mm.
obviously, to get there, and it was a nice group of friends, and I
Yeah.
really trusted you, and yeah, through my study of attachment theory and shadow work and all of it, through a lot of the ceremonial work, I've just gotten more and more connected to that deep longing and the source
Yeah,
of
you
it.
really have been so spontaneously dedicated to that. Like you've let it, you've let it pull you on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
But I have tremendous, that really touches me,
Mm-hmm.
your journey in that way.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you say, I'm really curious just to take a step back around the leaderless groups, because I work with groups quite a bit as well. And
Mm.
where do you see that working, to have a group that's leaderless?
Well, I'm in one right now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's one of the most powerful I've ever been in. And it evolved out of, it's just very small. It's only 4 of us here in Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
And we came together spontaneously because we're deeply engaged in Charles Eisenstein's work
Mm-hmm.
around living in the gift
Yeah.
and creating a new culture basically here on Earth,
Yeah.
which is a lot of what I'm about too. And so at one point in the course, Charles offered us an inquiry, and inquiry goes like this. What is it in me or in my life right now that is truly ready to be surrendered or released or sacrificed so that I can participate fully in life, so that I can follow the thread of my own deepest calling, so that I can serve what I came here to serve. You know, there's lots of different answers to the second part of the question, but
Mm-hmm.
um, and we all just wanted to do that inquiry together. And so for the last month, we've been meeting twice a week for 2 hours each time, plus phone calls and emails in between. So it's been a total immersion.
Mm-hmm.
And tomorrow we're doing a ceremony, a 4-hour ceremony to sort of make the offering of these parts of ourselves or these ways of being that we're surrendering. And so because we have, it's like what I saw about the leaderless group is it needs something to bring it into a strong coherence,
Mm-hmm.
because ordinarily the leader is doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so this inquiry has been so alive for each one of us that it's what has served to bring that energetic coherence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been totally catalytic. I can honestly say that none of us are the same person who stepped into this process a month ago.
Wow. So you're
Yeah.
meeting, everything this group is doing is based around this question,
Yeah.
this inquiry of
Yeah.
what am I ready to surrender, let go of, sacrifice in order to be.
Or to step into the next part of my life. Some people have named it like that. And
Right.
Charles is he's a very wise being. So
Mm-hmm.
he guides you through the process. And a large part of that has been to caution us about getting caught in a should.
Mm-hmm.
That it has nothing to do with what I think I should be or should be doing.
Huh.
And also, again and again, he's saying, and also don't get caught in trying to be good.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about trying to be good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been really allowed us to get down to the bare bones without, all that other stuff in the way.
Yeah.
And in my work, the way I see the whole process is something I do a lot with people, which is um, helping them connect with what I call their soul code,
Mm-hmm.
which is like what I feel as the blueprint of our most deepest authentic core,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of which we came in with, that was part of our DNA, and a lot of which there are tremendous gifts and capacities inside that architecture, that inner architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another blueprint that we have, which I call our trauma code,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yep.
is the imprints we received that did not um, allow us to feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
or that we're free to be ourselves in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so those, and the thing for me that is so fascinating is the two things are not really separate,
Yeah.
because nothing is really separate.
Yeah.
It's all mixed up together. So our deepest wounds hold our gifts, some of our
Yeah.
deepest gifts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So unraveling like the motivations behind, the actions that we do, and seeing that's what we've been looking at. Like, what's the motive behind the way I've been up until now? And
Mm.
what is a deeper, truer motive for
Hmm.
me right now?
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, I feel so grateful to have
Yeah.
kind of been thrown in the deep water. I like the deep water.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you do too.
I do. Yeah.
Actually, I know you do. I don't even have to ask that question.
So there's so many pieces here. I'm just going to start with the gift
Sure.
economy piece.
Sure.
I'd love to hear more about how you're experiencing that, and the inspiration for that, and the motivation for it, anything around those things.
Oh boy, that's so I'm right in the middle of it,
Yeah.
Um so I had always felt a resonance ever since I read Charles's book on the gift economy many, many years ago.
What's the
And
name of that book?
whenever I think it's called
It's
the
called
gift
Sick.
Ec- oh,
Oh,
Sacred Economy, Sacred
yeah.
Economy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And every time in my work that I tried or that I actually did offer something using the gift economy, it always worked,
Okay.
like really, really well. And yet in my life, I had business coaches or coaches that were helping me with my business. And they would always say to me, you can't run a business that way.
Hmm.
And I believed them,
Right.
because that is the prevailing wisdom in our mainstream culture.
Yeah.
And so then somehow in the spring, I revisited the possibility, and I had gotten to the point where I was actually charging quite a bit for my work,
Hmm.
and part of that felt good, and part of it didn't.
Yeah.
It just didn't, and I was aware that it's what Charles calls a paywall, right?
What's that?
That means that only if you pay me what I'm asking can you get in the store,
A wall. Oh,
right?
I see. Yeah.
It's a paywall.
Yeah.
And so I was really aware that a lot of the people who would really want to work with me and who were ready to do the deep kind of work I do couldn't afford me anymore.
Right.
And that felt not right to me,
Hmm.
because the people I want to work with are the ones who are ready to really cross a threshold in their life.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I just decided to try it, and I flipped my business over to the gift economy. In a couple of days, it was pretty effortless,
Mm.
and I think it was a big leap. Like, it was
Yeah.
quite a leap of faith,
Yeah.
and I've had the experience over and over again in my life that when I take a leap of faith in the beginning, the universe will support me.
Hmm.
It's like what they call beginner's luck.
Yeah.
And I could feel it. I could feel the winds of grace under me going, go, Shayla, go, this, you can do this.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it in the first 3 months was that, it's basically saying to everyone who works with me, you can offer me what feels right for you as a fee.
Yeah.
And I take them through a process of giving them an idea of what people in my realm get paid,
Yeah.
right? So they have a ballpark figure or a sliding scale, and that it's not for free. Like, I do need to earn my living,
Yeah.
um, but it's a lot of it is up to them and what feels right to them, and what feels right is usually a bit of a stretch. So it's not like, oh, I can easily afford this, but it's still sustainable for the client,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So in the first 3 months, people were offering me more than I'd ever asked myself.
Wow.
And I thought, this is great. This is fantastic, right? Little
Yeah.
did I know that the whole process was going to flip around to the exact opposite in the following 3 months. People were offering me less than I had ever been paid in my life.
Right.
And that was really challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm still working with it. Like, I'm going to stay with it, you know, And I know there's a lot to learn. And Charles, he's lived it, so he knows all the pitfalls,
Yeah.
and he's very explicit about why it doesn't work. And it's usually because of less mature parts in us and an unclear motivation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So all of that is part of this process, right? So for example, people who, it's not about condemning mainstream life.
Yeah.
It's not about escaping
Mm-hmm.
and going off into the woods and living, it's not about that. So I feel pretty clear about that part of it. And yet our relation to money is so hardwired into our survival system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what drew me into it, because I feel, in terms of the global crisis that we're facing right now, and if we just pause and let ourselves feel it,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's a species becoming a species disappearing from Earth every 25 minutes right now, you know. And part of my work is letting people participate much more consciously, like becoming a global citizen and
Mm-hmm.
learning how to witness all of this without being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to check out
Yeah.
and take refuge in distractions and numbness.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of going through what I see as a narrow passage, and we don't actually know if we'll make it through to the other side at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that for me is our economy is a big part of the destruction that has
Mm-hmm.
happened.
Yeah.
And so it feels to me like unless we rewire our whole relationship with money and wealth, things will continue to change on the surface, but not deep enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I read over your description of thanks for sending that to me, of the gift economy, and I loved it. And
Mm.
I've experimented with gift economy here and there, and um, the document that outlines your approach is really helpful to clarify the intentions, the relational
Mm-hmm.
piece, the honesty and
Yeah,
transparency, all of that.
yeah.
The question that comes to mind is just what you touched on there, that um, capitalism is pretty embedded in our unconscious, and there's so many, the scarcity, all of that.
Yeah,
That awful phrase, it's just business, which means that we can cut out the heart and do things that we wouldn't do because it's business. All of those kinds of things are just so embedded. And there's a question in me around how to navigate those things, and um, if I'm sensing or intuiting or wondering if a client is not joining me in a true gift economy, but is still kind of coming from the more capitalist approach within the gift economy, if that makes sense.
well, yes, that does happen. Like I have one client who was offering me a certain fee, and then I found out just recently that this client is actually immensely wealthy. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Right. And the fee that I'm being offered is not matching what what feels right to me. So it's why most of us haven't done it, because there's a lot to learn about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that, and this is what I always noticed from the beginning, that because now every client I have is participating in that, and the relationships have changed.
Mm.
It's a very different relationship when I don't have a paywall.
Mm.
It's giving, because a gift is a whole different energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of what Charles dives very deeply into, like, what is a gift?
Mm.
Right? And ultimately it's to relate to our life as a gift.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's a radical transformation of consciousness.
Yeah. Mm. I would like to read that book. Yeah, I've heard of Charles Eisenstein. I heard him speak once, and definitely he's on my list to explore further.
He's very, very, very human, which
Yeah.
is a lot of what I love about him. And I think I also understand there's many transactions that go on in our culture that are not gifts, and there's nothing wrong with that,
Right.
right? Like I don't know if it can even always be gifting,
Mm-hmm.
but what I've also noticed since I entered into this process is how often we give gifts that are not really gifts,
Mm-hmm.
because gift doesn't have any strings attached,
Mm.
you know? So that's very common in families,
Yeah.
to receive a gift that you don't really want.
Yeah.
And even the ways we help often, like my daughter has educated me profoundly in that way. I thought I was just trying to help, but Mom, I never asked for that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I thought I was giving her a gift, but it wasn't a gift that she wanted. So that's not a gift.
Yeah.
That's me fulfilling a hidden need in myself in the form of a gift that I'm offering to someone else.
Yeah. 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 There's so much
I'm
there.
as I speak, I'm aware of how I think you touched on a lot of this in your nonviolent communication work too, didn't you? Because a lot of that's around need and
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. Valuing your own needs, valuing someone else's needs, and trying to have a relational exchange around whatever is being exchanged. There's genuine care.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. There's so much in this, there's the whole privilege piece in this as well, that I've been just learning a little bit about, but people who, like you were mentioning at the start, who've grown up in more privileged circumstances, their level of need is distorted by that. And someone who's grown up in less privileged circumstances has a different sense of need in terms of what they think they're able to be comfortable with.
that's right. That's right. And I think that's part of what always bothered me, because I did work and train for many years with like really top-notch coaches, beautiful people, but their fees were such that only people, who are quite privileged would ever be able to work with them. And I just thought that obviously is all right for them, but it never felt all right for me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because I feel like then I'm in a bubble, and a lot of my interest in the last while, especially since President Trump was elected, and we all became aware of the bubbles that we're living in, I think, at that
Mm-hmm.
point. So I've been really curious about getting outside my bubble
Mm-hmm.
and making more direct contact with people who are extraordinarily different from me and who have different lifestyles and different values.
I've been trying to sneak a look at my notes, but I'm just going to look directly at them instead, because there's some things I really want to make sure I get to here. So another thing I've always appreciated about you is how, this is a great example, how invested you are in the human experience, that you're, at least how I see you, being a mentor, coach, teacher, and someone who's deeply spiritual. You're also deeply committed to being a human on this planet.
Yeah.
And has that always been the case for you, or has that evolved over the years? Or
No, it was not at all the case when I was in India. I think the whole experiment in India ended up with a crash and burn situation with a teacher who was involved in all sorts of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a radical wake-up call for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened with so many other teachers right around that time.
Mm-hmm.
I had dear friends who were with Andrew Cohen and all sorts of other teachers who were involved in a lot of craziness, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember participating in a dialogue with, because I ended up being one of my teacher's teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and so did friends of mine that were with Andrew Cohen, who was quite a famous teacher. And we had a fascinating dialogue online one day about what we had learned. And the core piece was we all came to understand that everything that went wrong in those communities was because we lost touch with our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's like, I do work with people and help them connect to the spiritual realm.
Mm-hmm.
I have very powerful practices around that. But a beautiful friend of mine put it so beautifully just now. She said, we need to be very careful of flying too close to the sun.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah. It reminds me of that interview I think I sent to you with Gabor Mate and Nadia Shanti. And I just love, there's so much I appreciate about both of them, but I really appreciate how Gabor Mate is speaking out about the trauma in the world, but how, avoiding it costs us even in the spiritual communities. And
Yeah, he's obviously seen a lot of that too, and
mm-hmm.
he's pretty fearless in speaking out about what he sees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a very powerful voice.
Yeah. And I really appreciated Nadia Shanti. It was just honest. He said, I'm not a trauma expert, and there's things I need to learn there. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he is an extraordinarily grounded human being. Adia,
Yes.
I worked
Yeah.
with him for a long time. His roots go way, way down
Yeah.
into the ground.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Back to my notes for a moment.
sure.
Is there anything else you want to say about how your spirituality has changed over the years? And
Well, I've been, as I said in that intro I sent you, it's 7 years since I've been working with Thomas Hubel.
right.
And his kind of byline is, in our deepest humanity is our highest possibility.
Right.
And I've done a lot of very powerful spiritual practice with him, but also very intense trauma work and collective trauma healing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, my real passion is for where those two can really intersect.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of that for me has been the embodiment work and learning to fully inhabit this body, which means really saying a great big yes to life, and I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a small thing to do.
Mm-hmm. No. Yeah. I want to speak to that a little bit because I work a lot with trauma in my own healing and with my clients. And
Yeah, I'd love to hear you.
What I've discovered is that the trauma that we carry that's unresolved, part of there's many ways it affects us, but one of the fundamental ways is it keeps us from being fully committed to being here on the planet and being fully alive and facing the truth of what it means.
That's right. That's right.
And it's always been a little bit of a puzzle to me to how to show up to face the immense things that are happening on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
There's times where I've been the activist on the front lines, and
Mm-hmm.
there's times where I've checked out and not participated really at all. And what I trust now is that if I'm continue to do my healing as deeply as I can, then I'm going to find a way to be on the planet and show up that is grounded and balanced. And one of my therapist friends, the way he put it, well, actually he got this from an interview with Wendell Berry. Do you know Wendell Berry?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Wendell Berry, I think, I haven't seen the interview, I really want to see it, but it was on a panel about climate change, I think. And there were some of the voices, about we got to do something, and that kind of fear and anger and so on. And Wendell Berry, as far as I understand, was a little bit more of, essentially we need to face our fear of death if we're really going to show up here, because we might be dying and the earth will go on. And is that what is there in that for us to learn?
Yeah, it's so beautiful to hear you say all that you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have a deep implicit trust in your pathway, and your deep caring for the planet. But I also respect the fact that you've allowed yourself to change course.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels so close to the bone, what Wendell Berry said.
Yeah.
And I recently, in the early spring, spent some time with a man called Bayo Akomolafe, who's he's a black visionary and artist and creative being from Nigeria. Very, very intelligent man. And we were looking at the whole situation we're facing, which I sometimes call our global disorienting dilemma. Because it's extremely disorienting. We don't really know how to respond to it.
Yes.
And he invited us all to actually have a good look at how, just as in therapy, often our attempts to fix the problem make the problem, they're part of the problem, right? And if we look at that in terms of all the activism that goes on, that's quite apparent sometimes to me.
Yeah.
Because the woundedness is what's motivating a lot of the actions.
Exactly. Yeah.
The anger, the fear, the frustration. And so we looked at that very deeply with him,
mm-hmm.
and also at the brokenness that is in our culture, our whole global culture. And then we just sat in the brokenness together.
Mm-hmm.
I could feel that unwinding things in everyone who was there,
mm-hmm.
And not that you're supposed to sit in the brokenness unendingly, but
mm-hmm.
that's very close to what Wendell Berry was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, a core piece that's emerged is that any action that I take or that I would want to join in, I want to see if I can do it from a place where I'm not othering the people who may be on the other side even. They may be apparently on another side, but if I other them inside my being, that for me is the core of the dilemma
mm-hmm.
that we're facing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had a really powerful, beautiful experience recently when we, in Victoria, we had a Lights for Liberty evening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful organization that's combining vigils with lights and protests about the children who are in cages on the border of the US. And so I went down there with a friend one evening, and I was really struck by the beauty of everyone who showed up. It was all ages and demographics. And there weren't a lot, but there was about 40 or 50 of us. And there were kids who had made their own signs saying "Free the Children," who were very excited to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, the organizer had gone out to get something at the edge of, we were on the legislative lawn, and she went out near the corner where the street people were walking on the street, and she came back looking really distressed. And my friend and I asked her what happened, and she said, well, a man saw me and my little boy, and the little boy had a sign, and the man said to her, "Your child looks pretty free to me, lady, and maybe those other children should just go back home."
Ooh.
And that was a real blow, from someone who is angry and who has a totally different worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And when my friend heard that, her response was like, oh, like he's, basically he's a beast.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're very close and we've actually practiced together, I said to her, do you want me to share with you what I'm noticing? And she said, yeah. And I said, now you're doing to him the exact same thing that he just did to all of us,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that, I feel like that's the cycle I'm interested in breaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she heard me, which is rare. And she went, oh my God, you're right.
Yeah.
And we both stood there as the sun went down and tried to really step inside that man's world
Yeah.
and understand what moves him.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy practice.
Well,
And yet I feel like that's something that is part of your life too. And that you've spent a lot of time stepping into other people's worlds in your own way.
yeah, that's a fundamental principle of nonviolent communication, is to try to understand the feelings and needs of everyone, even if they have a very different opinion, lifestyle.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The
Yes,
way
that's been really at the heart of your way of being for a long time, really, then.
it's been an intention, I sometimes forget it, sometimes not, but
Yeah, me too.
it's shifted for me a little bit towards remembering that we're all carrying pretty serious trauma, particularly in this isolated, disconnected, in the Western world, if I can make that generalization. The more I do my own healing, and the more I learn, and the more I appreciate and understand the depth of the trauma we all carry from growing up in an isolated family that's disconnected from community, that's disconnected from the land, from traditions, and so on, that there's immense pain in that. And that pain often gets taken out on children. And so that goes deep into the shadow and into the nervous system. And it, that comes back to the healing work to me, when on that level, is a learning how to let the ego die. So it is coming back to trying to find comfort with death, in at least in terms of all the ways we learn to protect and shield and believe and so on. If we're courageous enough to let those come apart and be curious, that can feel like a complete death, because we don't know another culture or paradigm, or we've in our consciousness embedded the other paradigm that feels like the safest paradigm. So
Yes, yes. And I have learned a lot in the last decade about honoring the parts of us that are protecting us, and taking care of us through being defensive and protective, like to really deeply honor that, including our ego structure,
yeah,
because things don't dissolve if we fight against them, if we oppose them.
yeah,
My experience is everything dissolves through being seen and witnessed with clarity and love and compassion.
yeah. I
So I
heard.
have
Go ahead.
I have something I wanted to say in response to the death of the ego. I think that can be very misleading,
Mm-hmm.
um, because my understanding now, especially in relation to trauma, is that what you're talking about is actually developmental trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shock trauma is a single event like a car crash or something.
Yeah,
But living in a family that didn't hold us or welcome us or understand us is a developmental trauma.
yeah.
And the nature of those traumas, they interrupt our individuation
Mm-hmm.
process. And I do a lot of work around the individuation process,
Mm-hmm.
because there's such basic human capacities that have never been developed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're so simple, like to find my real yes and my real no and stand with that,
Mm-hmm.
to ask for what I actually need without shame,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so my understanding now, which is always subject to change, but is that the if I begin to fully individuate, I will naturally keep growing into a very different way of being that includes the soul that
Mm-hmm.
includes spirit. And eventually my identity starts to expand and dissolve without me needing to take a hammer to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I resonate with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The point that I was trying to make is that just the steps sometimes to trust, to try out saying,
Absolutely.
my yes, my no, I need help.
Oh yeah.
Those can feel like,
It's scary as hell.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And
and
you've taken so many of those risks.
yeah, yeah,
I really, I know that about you.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think the more individuated we are, the greater our capacity to also keep taking the risks. Because at every threshold in our development, there's a huge risks.
yeah.
And there's also, I think, what often was a great revelation to me when I cross through a threshold from one stage of development to the next. There's grief because I'm saying goodbye
Yeah,
to an old way of being that
yeah,
has been very comfortable and familiar. And
yeah. And the important part for me with that development that of the individuation is that I am creating an external life that supports it too. That
oh,
I have the community now that I can be supported by as I'm taking these risks. I have friends, therapists, teachers, community. I'm gathering that in to help me bring out this more individuated self. That's a key part of it.
yes, because the individuated self actually isn't separate.
Yeah.
It has autonomy, it has sovereignty, but it's not a walled off separate self at all. It's
Yeah.
connected. The more individuated we are, the more deeply connected we are
Mm.
to everything at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
Can I talk to you about triad work?
Please. Yeah.
Yeah, well, as soon as you started saying all that, I haven't even been able to write about this, because I do write about a lot of this, because it's been such an integral part of my life for so long and such a key part. And I'm for some reason at a loss to describe the power and the wonder of it for me.
Mm-hmm.
So a triad is a group of three people
Mm-hmm.
um, who are practicing together. So it's like a small practice community.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the last decade, I've had many, many triads, and some of them, have gone on for years and years. And the basic intention in a triad, like there can be different intentions,
Right.
but one of the most basic, I think, is to learn to be with each other, to show up in the moment um, with as much with as much of ourself as we can bring,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to give each person in the triad the same opportunity. So we're not giving advice, we're not trying to fix problems. It's not
Mm-hmm.
that kind of practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we could meditate together, we could engage in inquiry together, we could dialogue, there's all sorts of things. But eventually, if you keep going in that kind of work, and you can do it in person or online, a lot of my triads are online, the community, the small community of three that develops, is beyond any kind of friendship you could imagine,
Mm-hmm.
because you know each other
Mm-hmm.
to a depth that is rarely reached in our culture.
Yeah.
And so I went through some enormous changes last year. And, we can often, I think from my work with my clients, I know that often clients will say to me, I feel like I want to do that, but I have no idea where I'll find the courage,
Mm-hmm.
And for me, a lot of the courage and the resources come from our triads.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can't agree with you enough. Yeah. I'm in the midst of the deepest healing work I've done, and there's no way I'd be doing it without the friends and support that I have. There's just
Yeah. Yeah. It's just not possible.
yeah.
We're not wired that way.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet I still catch, so funny. The other day I caught a part of myself that had learned the whole process because I recently graduated from an internal family systems training.
Mm-hmm.
And I caught a part of myself that was thinking, now that I know how to do this, maybe I can do it on my own. And I thought, what is that? Right? So that tendency is pretty deep in all of us, I think.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good to be with you.
Yeah, you too. There's one other little piece I want to, because it was so beautiful, just along the other mentality. I heard an interview with a fellow who now works really hard towards, connecting people and restoring peace and between races and so on. But at one point he was in a hate metal band. I didn't even know that was a genre, but
Wow.
his band, just their goal was to inspire their audience to hate other races and so on.
Wow.
And the interviewer asked him, how did things change? Because now for years he's been working towards the very opposite.
Yeah.
And I think there was two pieces. I think one is he saw some violence that was just a shock to him. It really will come up. But the other piece he said that stood out to me more was that he said that there was enough people that I was trying to hate who kept meeting me with kindness, and I just couldn't keep up the hate in the midst of their kindness.
Yeah. That reminds me of all the stories about when Nelson Mandela was in prison.
Mm-hmm.
They had to keep changing his prison guards because they couldn't mistreat him because he was so kind to all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to keep changing them in order to really give him a lot of shit.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the thing I'm learning, I just feel like it's such an edge for me, but what I'm learning about the othering, and a lot of this with my work with Thomas Hubel, is that when I make you an other, I'm not inside your world. And so you become quite flat and two-dimensional.
Mm.
If I feel your humanity, if I feel the complexity of who you are, I can't really other you that
Mm-hmm.
way. I have to flatten you out
Mm-hmm.
in order to do that.
Yeah.
And that's a well-known thing in the things like the Holocaust.
Right.
That kind of violence and perpetration happens when the person you're committing the violence against has been flattened, very flattened, right?
Yeah. Another perspective I have on that is that when we don't get enough nurturing, emotional, intimate care growing up, then we have to survive out of our left hemisphere predominantly. And the left hemisphere apparently just sees everything in terms of objects, including humans. And, when I first heard that, I thought, oh, wow. So we have a lot of leaders who had not nearly enough emotional nurturing and are trying to lead mostly out of their left hemisphere.
That's so interesting. Is that part of your neuroscience wisdom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I never heard that before. That's amazing.
It's the right hemisphere that has the capacity for empathy and compassion and, attunement. And
Yes.
it's the right hemisphere is much more relational.
That's right. Oh, that makes sense then. If we weren't in a healthy relational field,
Mm-hmm.
of course, it would be the right one that would close down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you don't have it's through the same not being nurtured enough. There's probably also, I'm not enough. I have, not enough power, not enough worth. So then look at me now, I'm a leader and look how much power I have now and look what I can do. And
yeah. And also if I find a group to hate, then I feel superior.
exactly.
So that also helps with that wound.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a beautiful piece of wisdom for me about the right and left.
It's and this comes back to the MVC principle of trying to have empathy for others. And where it's gone for me is to try to remember the inner child in all of these.
That's right.
People who are acting the ways they are. There's an inner child in there who never got to nearly the level of care and love and connection and belonging. That's the level of empathy I try to stay connected to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I have that same, I can connect to that in me too.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also, when you were talking about the right brain, I was thinking of Jill Bolte Taylor and her stroke of insight. And when she was going through her very long and rigorous recovery process, one of the person that helped her the most was her mother, which touched me so much. And so one day when she was just beginning to be able to, do very basic human functions, but it was still mostly her right brain. It was the first day they went outside the hospital, and she was walking very slowly, and her mother was walking with her, and her mom said to her, "Careful of the edges." And she looked at her mother and went, "What's an edge?" Loved that question.
Yeah.
Because that says so much about the right brain, right? It's not, there's no edges, there's no walls. It's just this fluid, flowing reality where we're all interpenetrating each other.
Yeah. And then the left hemisphere can serve that connection in healthy ways.
Yes.
But when we lose the interconnection, then the left hemisphere just gets out of control.
Does it ever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to share my right hemisphere with you.
Sprinkled with a bit of the left.
Yeah. My left is going to take one last look at my my notes here.
Okay. Maybe I'll look at mine and see if there's anything for me too. Oh, yeah. There was one thing.
Go ahead, please.
Because I do a lot of ceremony and ritual. I even learned how to do it online, which was exciting to me.
Oh, wow.
Because I think holding a space of ceremony and ritual, this is not with plant medicines or anything. It's just without anything except for us. But I think that the nature of the ritual space can really allow us to. It's a whole dimension that allows us to access resources that are not available in our ordinary state of consciousness, and also to explore possibilities, to listen to, like, people will hear things in the ritual space that they don't hear ordinarily. It's a very powerful, for me, modality. And one of the capacities, because I work a lot with capacity building, and one of the capacities that's very connected with that is what's called the capacity for liminality, for being in a liminal space. And that's like what Jill Bolte Taylor was in. It's a space in which I'm deliberately letting go of everything familiar. And, it's often compared to like twilight between day and night, or when a trapeze artist is crossing from one bar to the other and she's, in the air. It's like that. I don't have my familiar ground to land on. And I believe we need to be able to learn how to be in those spaces together. Because really collectively we are in a kind of a liminal space right now.
Yeah.
And to become more at home in those liminal spaces instead of trying to get back to something familiar, I think is very, very powerful practice.
Beautiful. Yeah. I remember you sent me a bit of writing from the fellow that you mentioned earlier, the black fellow. I can't remember.
Bayo Akomolafe.
Yeah.
Love saying his name.
And he said something in that writing, tell me if I have this right, that we're not going to save the world. And that very concept of saving the world is a colonial type of mentality. Am I right with that? Am I close?
Yeah, I think exactly. And I think it's also a trauma code,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
comes often from a helpless child in a family where everyone's going down and they decide, I've got to save everyone.
Right.
So it
And
comes from many different places, but not from clarity and health. And yeah.
yeah. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think a lot of the activism in the world, or the idea of trying to save things, is coming from that trauma in trying to keep things how they are,
Yeah.
instead of getting comfortable in the liminal space of, things are changing. How can we be present for that?
That's right.
And
That's right.
how can we, allow that change to happen, and allow the whatever is new to come, instead of try to save, which another way in the trauma perspective is to hold on to what's familiar, and what
Yes.
even though it's not working, it feels safe and familiar, and I really want to hold on to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so good. Like it's so good for me just to feel um, the embodied clarity that you are walking with about this. And yeah, the saving the world thing, it reminds me to give a very simple example of why that is so often not sustainable. Um, when Tiger Woods was champion of the world at a certain point because of his golfing, he hit an edge in himself. It was quite a few years ago, and he lost his very first match.
Mm.
And he kind of knew that was going to happen. So he realized something had to change. So he had two golf coaches, and he went to them both, told them what had happened. And the first one said, watched him play for a while and said, yeah, I can help you. We can, there's some things we can do with your stroke. He said, it's all right, but we'll just do this and this, and it'll take about 6 months, right? You'll be fine. And then he went to his other coach, and his coach watched him play for a while and said to him, yeah, I can do what the first coach told you. But he said, that's not going to take you where you want to go. He said, what I really want to offer you is we can break your whole stroke down and take you right back to ground zero and rebuild it from the ground up, and then you'll have something that you're not going to have if you try to patch up what you already have. So Tiger, being the master that he is, chose the second possibility. And it took a lot longer and it was a lot more work, but as soon as he came back, he was right on the top again. So that for me is a powerful metaphor, and how tempting it is to just kind of, put lipstick on the pig.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. Part of going back to ground zero for us, though, means that we're willing to let our hearts crack open and
I know.
feel all that's there.
And it's not for me in relation to the global crisis. It's not a black and white thing either. Like I have a great empathy with the Extinction Rebellion people in England and what they're doing. And when I feel them and watch them, a lot of them are coming from such a beautiful place, but they're just wanting us to know, like, the time is up for continuing as we have been, right? So it's a very complex dilemma. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. And we're all in it together. We're all in this mess together. And there's some beautiful things emerging from it.
Indeed.
Do you feel that there's beauty emerging?
Yeah, I particularly feel that in the realm of the healing work that's happening these days.
Can you say a bit more about that?
You know, I think through all of the different ways we have learned and researched, including neurobiology and brain scans and all of it,
Mm-hmm.
we've come to really understand what it means to heal and what um, and and you know, I'm actually right now taking a course in internal family systems matched with meditation, and
Oh,
it's just exquisite because it's holding, you know, so much care for all of our parts of our psyche, including the murderous rage parts, the
that's right.
depressed parts, the courageous parts. It's holding them in the way that I believe they need to be held, not just from a spiritual perspective, but actually from the nervous system perspective. If we really, when we get to the deepest layer of our healing, their compassion and presence are key, and in a relational
That's right.
context are key parts of integrating trauma. So that's where I see so much beauty, is in how the psychological healing has, through all the research and study, it's joining beautifully with traditional spiritual approaches. And they're both, from what I see, they're complementing each other, they're informing each other. In this course I'm taking, one of the teachers is trained more from the meditation realm, the other one's more in the psychology realm, and they both have beautiful things to share, and they're
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on in the realm of internal family systems, and I love it.
mm-hmm.
And I really it was internal family systems. You know, when you kind of know something, you hear something and you know it, it lands in your mind, and then you hear it a few more thousand times and it lands a little deeper, and then you hear it a few more thousand times and it goes a little deeper. And so it was through my training in internal family systems that I really came to understand that the parts of us that are still struggling, that feel young and helpless and overwhelmed or frustrated or lost, we may have thought we were connecting with them, but we haven't really been able to hear them
mm-hmm.
and what they actually need to say and what they actually need. Like, we haven't had the capacity to really listen in that way and attune. And that's such a simple thing, but so, for me, so profound,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Which is us shifting back to balanced hemispheres, because we've been too much in the let's fix it, solve it, analyze it, and that listen, understand, attune is, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
that's the starting place for healing. Yeah.
yeah. The starting and the ending.
And the ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing that you're embodying this in a masculine form. To me, I really,
Mm.
I'm touched by that.
Mm. Well, if people want to find you and read more about you, or you're at Wide Awake, is that right? Wide Awake Heart.
Wideawakeheart.net. It's an old website that's about to be reborn, but yeah, they can. And yeah, I've taken a hiatus from my writing for a while, but there's lots of my writing on the website.
Mm-hmm. Any other last words you want to share?
I'm just grateful for all that we were able to explore together, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's such a beautiful thing when we know we're not walking alone
Mm-hmm.
in this deep, deep, wild water that we're all swimming in together. So that's my prayer, that more and more people can have that experience of not being alone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you, Shayla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Goodbye.